Giribharatari Gopijana Vallabha Gopijana Vallabha Giribharatari Gopijana Vallabha Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Gopijana Vallabha Giribharatari Gopijana Vallabha Gopijana Vallabha Giribharatari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jai Nitya Vishnu Paramahamsa Parivraja Ashto Tarasata Srimad Hisvanga Savai Charana Arvinda Bhaktan Samshara Prabhupada Ki ISKCON Viditam Chaya Save the whole world Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Paramahamsa Parivraja Ashto Tarasata Srimad Hisvanga Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavi Ki Namacharya Shri Thakur Ki Prem Sagaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Govardhana Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Braj Bhumi Shivindam Ki Navadip Mayapur Namaki Purushtam Chacha Jagat Puri Namaki Gangamai Ki Jamurmai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Sama Veta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Nitai Go Premanandi. Oh, glorious assembled bodies, oh, glorious assemblies, oh, glorious assemblies, oh, glorious, Lord, feet of Sri Guru and Sri Garanga, oh, glorious Sri Prabhupada Ki Jai, oh, Vishnu, Krishna Samvara, Sri Manu Samvara. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Badarayana Ruvacha Evam Krita Vyavasito Evam Krita Vyavasito Evam krita vyavasito dadyan atarvanas tanum dadyan atavanastanum dadyan atavanasvatanum evam krita vyavasito dadyan atavanastanum pare Bhagavati Brahmani Pare Bhagavati Brahmani Pare Bhagavati Brahmani Atmanam Sanayan Jaho Atmanam Sanayam Jaho Atmanam Sanayan Jaho Pare Bhagavati Brahmani Atmanam Sanayam Jaho Shri Badrayani Ruvacha Evam Krita Vyavasito Dadyan Atarvanastanum Hare Bhagavati Brahmani Atmanam Sanayan Jaho Shri Badrayani Ruvacha Evam Krita Vyavasito Dadyan Atarvanastanum Hare Bhagavati Brahmani Atmanam Sanayan Jaho Vaishnavis? Shri Badrayani Ruvacha Shri Sukadeva Goswami said, it's interesting that Badrayani is referring to Sukadeva because usually it refers to Vyasadeva. Yeah, it's interesting. Because Badri means cherry trees. But Badrik Ashram is called Badrik Ashram because it's a place where a lot of cherry trees grow. And so traditionally we understand that Vyasadeva was there in Badrik Ashram, but for some reason it's being translated here as Sukadeva Goswami. Evam, thus, Kritya Vyasita, making certain of what to do in giving his body to the demigods. Dadyan Tadichi Muni, Atavana, the son of Atarva. Tanum, his body. Pare, to the Supreme. Bhagavati, personality of Godhead. Brahmani, the Supreme Brahman. Atmanam, himself, the spirit soul. It's significant, at least in my observation, this word Atmanam in this verse is very significant because it's separating between the body and the self. It's defining that actually, not only is he giving his body, but he's actually surrendering himself to the service of Krishna. Sanayan, offering. Jaho, gave up. Translation. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, Dadichi Muni, the son of Tava, thus resolved to give his body to the service of the demigods. He placed himself, the spirit soul, at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in this way he gave up his gross material body made of 5 elements. Responsively. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, Dadichi Muni, the son of Atarva, thus resolved to give his body to the service of the demigods. He placed himself, the spirit soul, at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in this way gave up his gross material body made of 5 elements. So you can see here, and also I guess from the previous verse also, that he didn't consider the material body to be very significant. He just saw it to be, something that you use in the service of others. And like we see in the modern age, people are so attached to their bodies, and there's, if you go into any shopping mall, you'll see half the shops, probably more than half the shops, are focused on pampering the body in some way, either dressing the body or, they have these things nowadays where you see ladies sit there, or guys sometimes too, sitting there for hours and hours and hours getting their fingernails painted, and stuff like that, and hair shops and all different types of stuff. But here is obviously a great transcendentalist who actually saw, and we'll also see as the this story unfolds also with Vritrasura. He's also seeing that his body is actually, it's just there for the service of others. He's not particularly attached to the body itself. And it's giving an interesting contrast between him and Indra, because we see Indra, on the other hand, is quite attached to his body. He's quite attached to the facility that the body provides. Whereas someone like Dadichi Muni is understanding that it's all just temporary. Everything that comes as a result of the body is temporary, and it's here for some time, and it dwindles and it vanishes, it's gone. And so he's not overly affected by the loss of the body. Whereas, it's something I guess we need to reflect on with ourselves, and especially as we're aging, is how attached am I to this body? Because we can see if we're attached to this body, then at the point of death, then that's where our consciousness is going, is the attachment to the body. So it's vital, therefore, that in our current existence, we need to cultivate this detachment, and it begins by understanding the nature of the body, understanding that it's just made of 5 gross material elements and 3 subtle elements as well. The mind, intelligence, false ego, what is it? Bhumi up and the normal, kamano buddha, hankarayati, bina prakadashtita. That earth, water, fire, air, ether, these are the separated material elements. This is the composition of the body. Then mind, intelligence, and false ego. And understand that these are all just temporary elements. They're manifested for some time, and they remain. And then when it's time to wind up, then these elements, they cease. But in the next verse it says, but he, the soul, he's eternal. And so we can begin to understand the difference between the self and the soul, or the self and the body, by contemplating the nature of the body, by contemplating the nature of matter, and seeing how temporary it is, seeing how, even though we might have a nice car, for instance, you go out and you buy a brand new car, and it's so beautiful. Look at my car, you see sometimes people are so attached to their cars. But you just drive it around for a while and get a few bumps and scrapes. Drive it in Delhi, for instance. How long is it going to last in a place like that? And it's just you're just getting bumps and scrapes. And after some time, it's not such a nice car, and you kind of you're not attached to it. And so you can see, like with something simple like a car or anything we have, clothing or computers, technology, whatever. It's very nice when it's brand new, and we're our attachments manifest. But after we've had it for a while, you get a nice jumper and it gets a few holes and things like that. You're still a little bit attached. You get a few more holes, and then something tears or a sleeve falls off. Oh, I don't want it anymore. And but it's just the nature of matter. Krishna explains in the Gita how that this material nature, it is temporary. It's short-lived. It doesn't last for very long, and it dwindles and vanishes eventually. So when we contemplate the nature of matter, and we start to get a little bit reflective on it, we can understand why be attached to something that's so temporary. Why invest all my energy into something that's so temporary? Better we use that same effort and invest it in the soul. And this is one of the lessons I feel in this story. We see how Dadichi, because he's a renunciate, but also he's realized as to the nature of the self and the nature of matter. And therefore, when the demigods come and ask him for his body, which is quite extraordinary, really. Could you imagine going to someone asking, "Oh, can I have your body? I want to use the bones for a weapon." How many people would respond favorably to that? They say, "Get out of here! You're crazy." So it's quite an extraordinary story. Prabhupada's purport, as indicated by the words Pare Bhagavati Brahmani Atmanam Sanyan, Dadichi placed himself as spirit soul at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So see, he understood his position. He understood that he was an eternal servant of Krishna. And whatever happened to the external material body was not really of that much consequence, as long as you have the body used to serve Krishna. So he saw that Krishna or Vishnu had asked him, had asked the Devatas to go to him and ask for his body. So ultimately he saw that the sacrificing his body was service to the Lord. In this regard, one may refer to the incident of Dhritarashtra's leaving his body, as described in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam 1.13.55. Dhritarashtra analytically divided his gross material body into the 5 different elements of which it was made: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and distributed them to the different reservoirs of these elements. In other words, he merged these 5 elements into the original Mahatattva. By identifying his material conception of life, he gradually separated his spirit soul from material connections and placed himself at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So you can see like he's identifying, Dhritarashtra in his meditation is identifying that actually what the body is. It's just made up of elements. It's just made of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. So this helped him to give up the attachment. Because like you go into the garden, you see a lump of earth, are you attached to it? Or you see a bucket of water, are you attached to it? No, you just see it for what it is. It's just an element that I can use. So, like because we've been situated in this material body for so many years, and not just this material body, it's just one body after the next, after the next, after the next. And because we identify with the pains and the enjoyment that the body experiences, therefore we think the body is ourself. But if we can analyze what the body is, and of course sometimes it becomes a little bit easier as you get older, because the idea is as the body suffers more and more, you just want to give it up. But the problem is, it's like this is not a very deep realization. It's very superficial, because what happens in the next life when we get another body, a very nice, young, attractive, handsome, strong, well-functioning body, then the attachment becomes deep again. It becomes, not it becomes deep, it already is deep, but it manifests, it becomes more prominent. The only reason we when we get older is we manifest some degree of renunciation is because it's not working very well, so just get rid of it. It's not, but actually what we want is a well-functioning body. And you see that, when I was younger, you hear old men sometimes go on about, when I was younger, I did this and I did that, because they're attached to the facility of the body. So if we can contemplate, and Lord Shiva, he encourages us also to contemplate, because oftentimes you'll see a man will contemplate a woman's body and a woman will contemplate a man's body with this view to enjoying. Lord Shiva, he talks about this. But if we contemplate what that body is, this so-called beautiful body, and if you look at, and of course we see different people's perceptions of beauty is different. Some people will think one body is very beautiful. Other people think, no, that's quite ordinary. So it just depends on a person's guna and karma, how they see particular bodies. But even though we may look at and it's really what it gets down to is just packaging. It's just like when you go into the supermarket and you see like the fancy brand, and you see the home, I don't know what they call it here, but in Australia we call it the home brand. So like the home brand might be just a yellow packaging with black writing on it. Very simple, plain. But you look at the product next to on the shelf, very fancy packaging, a picture of cows going through nice paddocks and stuff, very, very attractive. And so 9 times out of 10, people go for the fancy packaging, not realizing it's exactly the same product in both the packets. And the thing is, in most cases, it's made in the same factory. It's exactly the same product. They just change the packaging. And that's all the material body is. It's the same packaging. Prabhupada tells a story about, what is it? Lakshahira. Yeah. There was a famous prostitute, well, at least in the scriptures, famous prostitute called Lakshahira. So Lakshahira means lac, like 100,000. And hira means diamonds. So in order to enjoy with this woman, you had to pay 100,000 diamonds. That was the fee. And so what happened? There was this one man. He saw Lakshahira and he became completely besotted with her. He was already married to some other lady, and he was determined, like, whatever happened, he had to enjoy this woman. And so his wife understood, the man's wife understood that he was besotted with this prostitute, and he wanted to enjoy with her. And so she somehow or other, she arranged for him to enjoy with this prostitute. And actually what happened is she went to the prostitute, and if I've got the story right, she went to the prostitute and made an arrangement with the prostitute that, I think she was going to serve the prostitute or something like that, because they didn't have the money. But she said, but my husband wants to enjoy with you, and, because she was faithful to her husband. She just wanted her husband to be happy. So the prostitute said, okay, no problems, I'll sort this out. So then the man came to the prostitute, and she said to him, well, come back after, I can't remember what time it was, come back after a certain amount of time, it was a few weeks, and then we can enjoy. And so he agreed to that. And then so what happened was, when he went away, she started to fast and take purgatives. And so what was happening, she was taking these really strong purgatives, which gave her diarrhea, but it was also causing her to vomit. And she was taking these purgatives for weeks. And as a result of the story is often called liquid beauty. And as a result, she was vomiting and she had diarrhea, and she's passing lots and lots of stool and that. And her body became very emaciated and withered. And so, but what she did is she kept all the vomit and the stool in buckets. And so the man came back a few weeks later, and he saw that this like, in this beautiful setting where this gorgeous prostitute was staying, this old haggard woman, at least in his perception, was an old haggard woman. And he came in and he said, "Where's Lakshahira? Where's this beautiful prostitute? You know, I came here to enjoy with her. Where is she?" And she said, "I am Lakshahira." And he says, "No, you can't be Lakshahira. Lakshahira is so beautiful. You're old and ugly." And he said, "No, I am Lakshahira. But you know, while you in the time that passed between you were here last, I've been taking a purgative, and here is my beauty." And she showed him the buckets of vomit and stool. You know, so the point in the story is that, you know, it's the same packaging. I mean, it's the same product, but just the packaging is different. You can see, like you know, with this prostitute, she took this purgative, and and lost her so-called luster and beauty, and then because this man was into the externals, he perceived it being different, and so it's very interesting to contemplate. Or it's very helpful to contemplate the nature of the self and the nature of the body and see the difference between the two. But because of attachment, because we're attached, we can't separate the two. We can't see the difference. We see it as one. And this is the effect of the illusory energy, is to cover over our intelligence, so we consider that the body is the self. But this is the point that Prabhupada's making here about Dhritarashtra and also about the Dichi, is because they contemplated how the body is made up of these 5 material elements, and how these elements are, you know, temporarily manifest for some time. You know, that they manifest, they remain, they dwindle, they vanish. You know? And that's all the body is, and the self is different from that. Therefore, they were able to separate, you know, themselves from this attachment to the body. And it's interesting that Prabhupada uses the example here of Dhritarashtra, because even though Dhritarashtra engaged in this contemplation, and even though he placed his consciousness at the lotus feet of Krishna under the guidance of Vidura, still, due to his offenses to the Pandavas, he wasn't able to ultimately attain spiritual emancipation. He basically, all he was able to do was free himself from karma, but he had to undergo, you know, further purification because of the offenses he committed to the Pandavas. Because you can't just, you know, as we know, you know, when you read Harinam Chintamani or different books like this, you can't just commit offenses to devotees, then take shelter of Krishna and expect you're going to achieve spiritual emancipation. No, you actually have to have a proper attitude in serving Vaishnavas, and Dhritarashtra didn't have that. And I think you were telling a story about this the other day, Murli, about some great soul who one of the Alvas, wasn't it? Yes, it's one of the great Alvas. Anyway, someone was telling a story about it the other day, who was serving the deity very, very nicely, and he actually used to communicate. He used to talk with the deity, and I don't think it was Nam Alva. It was one of the Alvas. Anyway, there's 13 different Alvas, all very wonderful. It's on a par to Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, same sort of thing. But he was serving the deity Ranganath. I think it was Ranganath. I'm not sure. But the point being there is that he was able to communicate with the deity directly. And one soul came to him, one devotee came to him and asked him to ask the Ranganath when he would go back to Godhead. And Ranganath replied that at the end of this life he'll go back to Godhead. And so, but the Alva, he wasn't particularly concerned about his own emancipation. And then, you know, for some reason, the idea came into his head to ask the deity. And then, but he didn't want to bother the deity with his own things. So at one point, the deity said to him, "You have a question you want to ask me?" Because he knew his mind. And he said, "Yeah, I was just wondering when I would go back to Godhead." And the deity responded, "Oh, you know, you're my very dear devotee, but you're not ready to go back to Godhead yet." And he said, and then he asked, "Why is that, my lord?" He says, "Because you haven't actually developed that strong desire for serving the Vaishnavas," or something like that. Anyhow, so the point goes that he gave up the service he was doing for the deity. He went and he disguised himself and then went to start serving his god brothers and stuff like that because he just didn't have that strong desire to serve the Vaishnavas. Well, it wasn't manifesting. That's all. He had it, but it wasn't manifesting. And so by that strong desire to serve the Vaishnavas, to please the Vaishnavas, then he pleased the Lord and he went back to Godhead. And so that was the challenge that Dhritarashtra had, is because of his offenses to the Pandavas, especially to Arjuna and Yudhisthira, etc. Then and all along he nurtured Duryodhana's kind of negativity towards the Pandavas, and he encouraged him because ultimately Dhritarashtra was attached to being the royal, the king or the emperor, and and it's kind of interesting because even if Yudhisthira was the emperor, he still would have had the same lifestyle. It wouldn't have affected him whatsoever whether his son was the emperor or Yudhisthira was the emperor, because Yudhisthira was a Jatasatru. He never saw anyone as his enemy. He always saw everyone as equal. And even though his uncle treated him very harshly, he still respected him as his uncle and treated him very, very with great respect and great honor. But Dhritarashtra was attached to the idea of his sons, because we see in the beginning of the Gita, when he's speaking to Sanjaya, he says, Mama kaha Pandavas chaiva. That my sons and the sons of Pandu, he separated them. But, strictly speaking, they were all Kurus. He referred to his sons as the Kurus, and then Pandu's sons as the Pandavas. But they're all Kurus. So he saw a distinction because of the identification with the body. And, he saw all the things that were associated. He said, Mama kaha, my sons. He saw all the things that were associated with the body as mine. And this is the challenge. It's like, if we identify with this mortal frame as being the self, then the attachments develop. We start to think, this is mine, this is me, this is mine. Everything related to this body is mine. It's mine to enjoy, it's mine to control. But ultimately, it's all matter, and it's temporary. Our connection with it is temporary. And it comes and it goes. But as long as we maintain this attachment, then what will happen is we'll get one material body after the next, after the next, after the next, and it just keeps going on and on, endlessly, as long as we maintain that attachment. That's why, this story is particularly helpful for us, because it's showing how Dadichi was not attached to the material body. And when he was asked to give the body up in a moment, he had some playful words with the Devatas, with Indra, just because he wanted to hear him speak some philosophy. But ultimately, he was willing to give up this body for the service of others, and ultimately for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And because he didn't have attachment to the matter that this body is, he understood what it was. He had realization, and this is why it's very important to study Srila Prabhupada's books and to regularly study Prabhupada's books and to discuss the philosophy, to attend Bhagavatam class, and to give Bhagavatam class, to hear the philosophy, because it will help us to deepen our understanding of the situation, to deepen our understanding that I'm not this material body. Because this is the essence of avidya. This is the root of all avidya, is to think that I'm this body. And all other ignorance or misunderstanding we develop in this life comes from this avidya of thinking I'm the body. But actually, Krishna explains very clearly to Arjuna, you're not this material body, you're the eternal servant of the Lord. Lord Chaitanya makes the same point, that we're not this material body, we're eternal servants. But as long as we cling on to this, and we do cling on to this misconception, as long as we cling on to this misconception, we're going to take birth after birth after birth after birth in this material world. By identifying his material conception of life, this is the thing, by identifying, you identify what your conception of life is, your material conception. It's really important. He gradually separated his spirit soul from material connections and placed himself at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The example given in this connection is that when an earthen pot is broken, the small portion of the sky within the pot is united with the large sky outside the pot. Mayavadi philosophers misunderstand this description of Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, Sri Ramanuja Swami, in his book Vedanta Tattvasara, has described that the merging of the soul means that after separating himself from the material body made of 8 elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, false ego, mind, and intelligence, the individual soul engages himself in devotional service to the Supreme Person of Godhead in his eternal form. Ishvara Parama Krishna, Satchidananda Vigraha, Anadi Radhi Govinda, Sava Karana Karana. And this is again, this is a really important understanding, is merging oneself with the Lord as you know, it's not even merging, but this is the way the Mayavadi is interpreted. But it's the understanding of how the soul becomes reunited. It's not like, you know, even like if you look at it from the example of the air in the pot, you have all the elements that are there in the air, you know, in the pot. And it's not like they lose their individual existence, but no, they're reunited again with the greater mass of air. It's not like the atoms and the whatever that's there in the pot, the elements that are in the pot, cease to exist and become one with everything else. They still have their individual existence. And so it's the same for the jiva, is that when the jiva is reunited with Krishna, it doesn't mean the jiva loses its existence. That existence remains. As Krishna says in the Gita, he says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future will any of us cease to be. There's a lecture where Prabhupada he gives on this verse. He says, "Natram eva jaturisam natram nem." He says, there's one word he emphasized. He said, but this word "but" it indicates, but it never ceased to be. Even though, you know, you give up this body, the jiva never ceases to be. So it's a very, very important understanding that many people miss. Because why? Because they think the body is the self. And they think, therefore, as long as I have this body, I can enjoy. But as soon as the body becomes decrepit or the body ceases to exist, end of enjoyment. And this is where a spiritualist or someone who's actually understanding the transcendental nature of the self is very different from your mundane religionists or mundane philosophers, is because they're thinking that it's just this one body, this one life, and at the end of this life, finished. So it's a very, very different perception. The material cause of the material elements absorbs the material body, and the spirit soul assumes its original position, as described by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jivera Surapahoy Krishnera Nityadas. The constitutional position of the living entity is that he is the eternal servant of Krishna. When one overcomes the material body through cultivation of spiritual knowledge and devotional service, one can revive his own position and thus engage in the service of the Lord. So, you know, this story is demonstrating this very clearly, and especially this verse here, we see that Didichi understood, I'm not this body, and therefore he reflected deeply on the nature of the body, and he placed his consciousness at the lotus feet of Krishna. And the story is also helping us to see he didn't lose his individual existence. He actually saw himself as a servant. And this is the eternal constitutional nature of the jiva, as Prabhupada is quoting Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jivera Swarupahoy Krishnera Nityadas, eternal servant of Krishna. That's our only identification. And because he had this identification, he was able to give up the body without suffering, without, you know, any unnecessary false identification. He just saw that this is me, this is not me, this body is not me. I am the soul, I am a servant of Krishna. And in that way he was completely peaceful. He wasn't disturbed at the thought of, oh, I'm going to lose my body, which I cherish so much. He wasn't even slightly disturbed by it. So very, very wonderful story. And as always, we see in these stories in the Bhagavatam, very, very instructive, helping us to understand more and more about the nature of the self. And, you know, as long as we have, as I said before, as long as we have this attachment to the body or this identification with the body, this will cause us to take repeated births and deaths in the material world. But when we can come to this point of understanding the separation of the self from matter, the difference between the self and matter. And this will only come, as Prabhupada is talking about here, by contemplating the nature of the self, and we become able to contemplate the nature of the self by studying the scriptures, by hearing, especially by hearing and chanting. And I often refer to this point that Prabhupada makes in the first canto, I think it's in the 5th chapter, where to speak the Bhagavatam and to hear the Bhagavatam is more important than reading the Bhagavatam. Because when you speak, realizations come out. And when you hear, you're hearing realizations of others. They're practical experience of the Bhagavatam living in their lives. Because you know that the Bhagavatam is not a static book. If one is practicing devotional service in the association of devotees and hearing the scriptures become alive in our lives. That they're actually, so many times I've had the experience where something might be going on in my life, and some whatever, some challenge, or whatever, and I sit down to read, and it's kind of interesting. It seems like you open up the book right where you need to, because the Bhagavatam or the Gita or whatever it is you're reading is speaking to you about what you need to be doing. Whether we take notice or not is another thing, but it's very interesting. And also I find that over the years and years that of reading the scriptures, the more I read, the more the understanding deepens. And it seems like, I can't remember how many times I've read Bhagavad Gita. It must be in the hundreds by now. But every time I read it, it's like I'm reading a new book. Even though I remember points from the last time reading, I think, well, I didn't get that out of this last time. So it's really important that, to study the philosophy, to hear the philosophy, because it deepens. It has interesting effects. It has a purifying effect. So with the purifying effect, it just wears away the layers of past karma, the dust of illusion from our consciousness, and the knowledge becomes revealed to us. So then we can start to contemplate the real nature of the self, to contemplate the real nature of matter and the separation between the two. And then through the process of bhakti also, the heart becomes purified through hearing, through chanting, through serving, through associating with devotees, through worshipping the Lord. Then the heart becomes purified. And then the knowledge that's being revealed to us in the scriptures becomes more and more tangible and more relevant to us. So it's a very, very, quite an extraordinary pastime. Yeah. Any comments or reflections on this first questions?
I was just thinking, just a comment really, that these devotees were Trikaligya, like it wasn't, Dadichi Muni knew already what was going to happen, and he was going to be asked to do these, to make the sacrifice.
Sorry, that's probably my wife calling. I'll call her back. Sorry.
Yeah, and so I was just thinking, it's when you meditate on it like that, then it's easy to understand how they're able to easily comply, because one of the benefits of being very elevated spiritually is you're aware of past, present, and future. So you can kind of fall in with whatever the Lord's plans are. You're very malleable to whatever factors are going on around you.
Yeah.
So then when you look at it like that, you can see how they can make these, amazing sacrifices.
Yeah. See, I guess this is a really important thing for us as devotees of Krishna. Of course, in this material world, there are going to be so many things that are disturbing to us, and so many challenges and whatever. It's just the workings of material nature, and as long as we absorb ourselves in these things or get distracted by these things, that's all we're going to see is the workings of the material nature. But if we're able to, take the path, say someone like Dadichi has taken, and understand that actually whatever's going on in this material world is somewhat superficial and it's just a distraction, but if I can, just become more deep in this philosophy and become more deep in the pastimes of Krishna and more deep in my association with devotees, then I'll be able to get past all these things and actually really surrender to Krishna. Because there's a discussion in the third canto where it's explaining that as long as we're caught up in what's going on in this material world, we're not really doing devotional service. It's only when we can become free from these various anartas and illusions and attractions to this material world. That's when when the actual connection really begins. So for us, for those of us in the material world, because of our material conditionings and attachments, it's only through the mercy of the Guru that we're actually able to serve Krishna, because he purifies our offerings and then offers them to Krishna. I'm not exactly sure how that process works, but that's the understanding. So yeah, it's really important to contemplate deeply these conversations and these conclusions that are in these various pastimes, so we also can move beyond that. Because if we don't move beyond that, what will happen is at the end of this life, we'll take birth again in this material world. And like, do we really want to do that? Do we really want to come back here and go through another birth? And another birth, and another birth, another birth, death, old age, disease. I mean, I remember I saw my daughter getting born, and I was thinking, both from the perspective of the mother and from the perspective of the child, I never want to do that again. That is just like, the most unpalatable thing I can imagine. But I know that due to my attachments to this material world, due to my attachments to the material body, the material elements, etc., at this point, that's what's going to happen. Because I haven't let go. Because I'm still trying to manipulate the material energy in different ways. I'm still trying to be the controller and trying to be the enjoyer. So until we can take the path that these great souls, with full enthusiasm, take the path that they're taking, we're going to take birth again. Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. We have a question from online, from Andrea. The question is, Hare Krishna, how to respond to a person who is close to you and is suffering in their material body and mind?
Sorry, a little bit loud. I'm a bit hard of hearing.
How to respond to a person who is close to you and is suffering in their material body and mind?
Yeah. I guess in situations like this, I think of something that Vaisheshika Prabhu often says, is you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. You can lead a man to knowledge, but you can't make him think. So, when people are suffering, I mean, the thing is, like, for us as devotees, it's easy for us to see how others are suffering, but then when we look at ourselves, sometimes it's not so easy. We think, well, if I do this, we're still in the same mindset where we're trying to enjoy. And we also see that when you go to someone and you try to explain to them that they're suffering, they just don't buy it. No, I'm not. I'm having a great time. Like when we were on Harinam the other day, like those kind of like, there's various groups of drunken people were coming up to us and rah 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 and sort of carrying on and hurry and all that sort of stuff, And if we had to sort of stop the kirtan and say, you guys are suffering, but if you chant Hare Krishna, you'll become happy, they wouldn't listen at all. They just wouldn't accept it. So rather than trying to convince someone they're suffering, because you're fighting a losing battle, the conviction has to come from within. They have to convince themselves. Rather than trying to convince them of suffering, better is we show them the positive alternative of devotional service. How devotional service is a life of great happiness, how devotional service is very pleasing. I find that's more effective rather than, coming out with the negativity. Of course, sometimes you're going to meet people who've had a realization at one level or another that they're suffering, and then they'll come and ask you questions. But for others, you need to just try to show them the positive alternative of devotional service, how it's a better life. And so many times we come across this that like you were telling me yesterday, Pran, about you were going to the old age homes and like that you're giving folks prasadam and stuff like that, and even you'll see that the nurses in that in the old age people home were seeing how the patients there were so much happier, so much more peaceful for several weeks afterwards. So they could see the difference of having involvement or contact with this lifestyle. Coming in contact with prasad, coming into contact with the devotees, hearing Shastra. You can see the difference. So what we need to do is expose people to that, and then those who are intelligent will make up their own minds. They'll actually realize that, yes, this is better. This is way better than what I've got. I even had an experience when I was a child. My mother, well, not a child, I was a teenager, I guess, or a young adult. My mother at one point, she said to me, actually, you're the only one of my sons that's turned out any good. But the only difference between what I was doing and what my brothers was doing is I was chanting Hare Krishna. But because of that lifestyle, you develop values, then my mother perceived that as being better. So, I didn't preach to her. I never preached to her at all because I just knew she wouldn't buy it. It's like parents cannot buy it from kids. You can't. It's very, very difficult for the parents to preach to their for the children to preach to their parents. Very, very difficult. Yeah. Anything else at all? Yes, try out Prima.
Thank you for the nice class. My question was, how do we create a balance where we can accept that this body is not us, but is the property of the Lord? So how do we take care of it in the Lord's service? And how do we look after others, seeing that their body is not them, but it's actually a vehicle which they're doing service with? So how do we look after the body in such a way that it's so we're not neglecting it?
It's kind of interesting because it seems like in devotional service we don't manage to figure that one out, and oftentimes it seems like we become Mayavadis. I'll give an example, which I'm sure many of you have experienced with Sankirtan cars. How many times have you got into a Sankirtan car and it's completely trashed? Or a temple car is completely trashed, filthy dirty, chip wrappers and all different types of food wrappers on it. There's no petrol in the tank. The thing is like dirty inside and out. There's just stuff everywhere. But if we had understanding that it was Krishna's property, if we really believed that it was Krishna's property, would we do that? No, every time we got out of it, the car would be spotlessly clean. When we drive it, we wouldn't drive it like we think we're in some sort of rally. We drive it like this is Krishna's car. I have to look after this car. And so the same sort of thing comes with the body. It seems to me, this is just my realization or my understanding of it, it seems to me is we have a somewhat superficial understanding of the philosophy. And in reality, there's some idea, but it's not really deep because we're still attached to the body. And you just look at the way we act, we're still attached to the body. You look at the way we do things, and like whenever there's an opportunity for enjoyment, we take that. But if we actually had deep understanding, like we see with the Dichi does, he has deep understanding, and he manifests his understanding by saying, okay, I'll give you the body. But would we do that? If someone approached us and say, can you give your body for this particular service? What would you answer? No way. I've got to become Krishna conscious. I've got to do this and I've got to do that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still deeply attached to the body. And only through the process of bhakti, through contemplating, through transcendental knowledge, then we'll start to understand. So it's a process, and we have to go through the process. We have to come to the point of understanding that we're not this body. And so it's in the interim stage, while we're still trying to cultivate that understanding, we just keep applying ourselves to the cultivation. And I'm sure you've experienced, and we all experience, as we go on in devotional service, our realizations deepen. We become more aware of the difference between the self and the body, and we act more in that way. But it's not just like one day you think this way and one day you don't. It's like, I remember, when I first joined the temple in Melbourne, I kind of had this perception I was going to be a pure devotee in 10 years. But here I am 40 years later, I still haven't got there. So it's, it takes time. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
Sort of. I was just thinking that we have the philosophy that we're not the body, then it's more likely that we think, well, we should neglect the body, the bodily needs, rather than look after the bodily needs so that we can actually do a service.
Sorry?
So that we can actually, in order to do the service, we need to look after the bodily needs, like the car. We need to make sure it's got petrol. We need to make sure it's clean.
Yeah.
So in the same way, the body has needs that need to be fulfilled so that we can actually function properly to do service.
Yeah.
So in one sense, we're not the body, but then we still have to fulfill the bodily needs so that
Yeah.
we can do service.
Yeah. The best thing to neglect, in my experience, the best thing is to neglect is the mind. Because the mind tells you all sorts of rubbish, focused on your attachments. The body, we have to maintain in Krishna service, because if we neglect the body, it stops functioning. And Prabhupada, he explained to Dhananjay. He said there's three things that are important in devotional services. The first thing is health, then japa, then service. Because if you don't have health, you won't be able to chant japa, you won't be able to do service. If you don't chant your rounds, you'll give up devotional service. So, sometimes temple managers like to put it the other way around. Service is the most important. Then don't worry about your health and just get your rounds done. But if you want to have strong, healthy devotees who are going to be able to commit to the mission, they need to look after their health. They need to have regular exercise, good diet, etc. But also mental health. You've got to look after devotees' mental health as well. We need to have, it's no good to have, Prabhupada said, these temples are not clubhouses for lazies and crazies. It's no good having a temple full of crazy people. That's not going to help at all. It's not good having a place full of lazy people, because this Krishna consciousness mission has the capacity to save the world. But we need people who are on the task, who are on the job, and who know what to do. So we have to look after our health. Then we have to, absorb ourselves in the chanting of the holy name. It's so vital. And the whole Bhagavatam, the real message of the Bhagavatam, there's many messages here, but the real message of the Bhagavatam is the potency of this kirtanam. And Shravam Kirtanam, it's the potency of it. And how we need to engage ourselves in that. That's the real message. And then, of course, we do service. That's what we do. But, so, part of our spiritual health also comes in that we need to deeply contemplate the nature of the self and the nature of matter, and see the separation between the two. But that's just going to come from study, and not just study, but hearing and chanting and stuff like that.
Thank you
That's
very
my
much.
realizations on it,
Thank you for
my
that.
experience. Anything else at all? Yes, Prabhu.
Hi Krishna. There's another comment from online, from Laura, saying that maybe when the mind feels better, some of the issues we experience with the body is easier to tolerate.
Can be, but still the mind is part of the material body. It's a subtle element of the material body. What really has to happen is the soul needs to become fixed. You, the soul, need to become fixed in Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, these problems will come and go. They'll just keep happening. But definitely, if the body's, because what happens is when the body is in poor health, the mind becomes absorbed in these things. I've had various experiences in life where I've had quite heavy ailments and illnesses and stuff like that, and I remember one time I had amoebic dysentery, and the first time I went to India, I was so sick, and it was like even just to chant japa was such a struggle, and most of the time I was just like I was actually hallucinating half the time, just in this delirium. And so it was really hard to become fixed in Krishna consciousness. But often what happens is when people have a strong, healthy body, they just want to go and enjoy that. Yes, we need to maintain the body, but the purpose, what's the purpose of maintaining the body? So you can have good sex life, so you can do, No, the purpose of maintaining the body is so you can use the body to serve Krishna. That has to be the motivation. It's the same as like, sometimes devotees will say, well, this, this kind of sadhana bhakti, or like they say that, excuse me, the process of sadhana bhakti, that'll only take you to Vaikuntha. But if your purpose with practicing sadhana bhakti is to purify the self so you can become a good servant of Krishna, then that'll take you to Goloka. So you have to look at what is the purpose, what is your reason for doing it. And so if one's reason for maintaining the body in good condition is so you can serve Krishna, then ultimately that'll lead to your emancipation. But if the purpose of maintaining the body is to be strong and healthy, and so you can have a good life, and good sex life or whatever, then that's just going to lead to further conditioning in the material world. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Go Premanandi.
Nrsimha Kavaca Prabhu ki.
Aye.